Well, welcome to the invitational culture training that we're doing tonight. Um, this is just a really wonderful opportunity for us to talk about one of those kind of dirty words of the church, evangelism. It kind of ranks right up there with tithing, in terms of how some of our congregations might feel about it when they understand that the sermon or the conversation is going in that direction. So I just wanted to start with sharing with you guys some of the recent research that Alpha has done in partnership with the Barna organization. In 2018, we did a research study together, and we discovered some really startling statistics that 38% of evangelical Christians don't have any non-Christian friends. So this means that more than a third of the folks who are sitting in your churches would say that they don't have any non-Christian family members or friends. We also found that 51% of Christian churchgoers would say that they have never heard of the Great Commission. And so that means that if they hear you start talking about the importance of sharing the gospel with your friends, that they think it's your idea and not Jesus's idea. And of those 49% who have actually heard of the Great Commission, only 17% actually knew what it meant. So that's staggering. Then 27% of practicing Christians actually think that it's wrong to share their faith. In a politically charged environment, you can maybe understand why. But if you ask that same question of millennial practicing Christians, the number goes up to a staggering 47% who would say, nope, it is wrong to share my faith with someone who doesn't know Jesus. So even for those who believe in sharing the gospel and actually have some friends that they might be able to share the gospel with, their vision of gospel telling is often faulty. The common view is of this dichotomy, that there are some who are called to share their faith, and we call them missionaries or preachers. And we see them as the ones who go and tell about Jesus. And everyone else is called to stay and support financially and with prayer those who go and tell. So we have those who go and tell and those who stay and keep quiet. And that's really the vision that most people have, most churchgoers have about evangelism. So if you are ever sharing about the importance of sharing your faith with somebody else and their eyes go like glazed over, this is why. Don't think you're alone. But I don't think that this is what Jesus had in mind when he commissioned us to go and make disciples. I think his vision was for all of us to live this lifestyle, really a lifestyle of sharing our love for and belief in Jesus. And so the only question really that remains is how far from Jerusalem should we go? Because we're all called to go. I was rereading this morning some wonderful words of Paul from Galatians 1:12. He said, "For I did not receive the gospel from any man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ." And so if it's good enough for Paul, it could be good enough for all of us, right? Like if Jesus wanted to, he could have made it so that everybody had the same kind of revelation of the gospel that Paul had. It's simple. That could be the way it is, but that's not how it is. He chose to make us co-missioners with him in the Great Commission. And I think it's time for us to begin demystifying and destigmatizing the concept and the very word evangelism. It's not something that we would say, oh, well, that's not really my responsibility, or, oh, that sounds kind of scary, or, oh, I don't really know anybody to share my faith with. This is a joy. This should be a joy that we have, that we get to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with those in our life who don't yet know him. So how do we create a missional, invitational culture in our churches in light of these statistics? And added to them, only 4% of Christians who would answer those spiritual gift surveys would actually say that they have the gift of evangelism. So 96% of the folks sitting in your church think that they have a get out of jail free card, because it's like, well, Jesus is the giver of all good gifts. He didn't give me that one. And so I'm not responsible. No. How do we help our parishioners who clearly struggle with sharing the gospel with those outside the faith? How do we help them catch Jesus's vision with joy and excitement? So Alpha is a tool to help your congregation live out the Great Commission by living a lifestyle of evangelism and discipleship. So as you probably know, Alpha is often described by church leaders as a course to help newcomers to their church understand the basics of Christianity. And while Alpha certainly does help explain the basics of Christianity, its purpose is really to help churches become more invitational and evangelistic. So Alpha works best when it goes from being this sort of bolted on curriculum, that's one of the many courses that a church offers, to being more of a way of life that defines the culture of a church. And often that shift happens when the pastor, the leadership team, and the Alpha team catch this vision of living a lifestyle of evangelism and discipleship. And that's the beginning of the entire church catching this vision of Alpha moving from being their thing over there to being our thing that we do together as a church. So today we are going to look at how Alpha is an invitation and not a proclamation, how the pastor and leadership team can set the vision for becoming more invitational, how to help parishioners catch this vision, and we'll look at the 5 steps that precede an invitation, and then how to make an actual invitation in 4 steps. So let's begin with Alpha as an invitation and not a proclamation. So, these statistics that I shared with you are bleak, right? If 51% of your congregation has never heard of the Great Commission, and 27 or 47% of your congregation, depending on their age, actually thinks it's wrong to share their faith, you're going to need to do some teaching around Jesus's Great Commission to go to for his followers to go and make disciples. We're going to have to help them get up to speed with this, right? We have to demystify it. We have to share that it is a joy. It's an honor to get to share the gospel with our friends and help them not to be afraid. And if 38% of your congregation don't have any non-believing friends, we're also going to have to educate them on what it means to live in the world and not be of the world. And these are really the first 2 steps that we need to make as churches in becoming more invitational. So I'll just give you a personal example. In my own life, since becoming an adult, I have had rampant opportunities to meet new people, to have opportunities to engage with them in my faith, people who haven't known Jesus, and then I get to know them better and better. And then as a young adult, a single adult, and then as a newly married, that was very easy. As a new mother, meeting all the parents of my kids' friends, I was able to always have new people in my life. I'm now an empty nester, and it has come to my attention that I don't have too many new people in my life. The new people in my life are people I might meet at church, but they probably already know Jesus. So I have to become intentional. I have to, first of all, become aware that I'm not meeting new people at this age and stage. And then I have to have a desire to change that so that I can take some steps to go outward, be outward focused, meeting some new people, not just like, oh, because I want to introduce you to Jesus, but yeah, kind of. So because that's how I've been commissioned. I am not just to stay in my holy huddle. That's not what Jesus wants us to do. So what do I do at this stage of life? Something very different than I did as a new mother, something very different than what I did as a freshly graduated college student. So that's just a personal example of how we need to really be thinking about these things. I don't have an answer. I haven't solved it all for myself, but I am thinking about what do I need to do differently at this stage of my life. So once we've educated our congregations, it's important then to note the part of the resistance that people feel to sharing their faith is how polarized our society has become. So the former executive director of Alpha USA, Craig Springer, wrote this great little book I'm going to reference a couple of times tonight, How to Revive Evangelism. And in it, Craig Springer says that we are living in a disagreement equals judgment culture. And I think that's really true. You know, in our fear of offending someone, we've ended up being unwilling to share anything that's too deeply personal, including the truth of the gospel. And this is all the more true for the younger generations. And so this is a radical shift from the evangelicalism of the 20th century, where we are so focused on apologetics. And, you know, if I can just have 20 minutes of your time, I can convince you of the truth that I know, which is obviously everybody's truth, right? That does not resonate at all today. But here's an interesting statistic. 94% of millennial Christians think that the best thing that could ever happen for one of their friends is for them to come to know Jesus. And that's in light of the fact that 47% of those same millennial Christians would say that it's wrong to share their faith.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what does that tell us? There's a disconnect there, right? So that tells us that they don't subscribe to our fathers or our grandfathers' style of evangelism. It's too much of an affront. It's too much in your face. It's too polarizing. A postmodern, post-Christian, post-everything culture requires an approach to evangelism that doesn't tell people what to believe, but rather gives them space to discover faith on their own. And so here's the good news. Alpha works perfectly in this post-everything framework. Alpha was designed 30 plus years ago in London when the UK and all of Europe was already post-Christian. Alpha offers our guests a safe space to be heard, to ask their questions, and to draw their own conclusions, all without judgment. All you need to do is get the guests there and set the table for them. So here's more good news. When you're running Alpha, you're not asking your congregation to get advanced training in evangelism or theology. In fact, they don't even have to have the gift of evangelism or teaching to invite someone to Alpha. You're simply asking them to be a friend like Andrew, to find their Peter and say, come and meet my Jesus. That's it. Alpha is a way to share our faith that fits in a postmodern world of self-discovery. So I want to touch now on the importance of the pastor and the leadership team in communicating the church's new vision and strategy. So whether you're pretty new to Alpha, or if you've been running Alpha for a little while, but you're like, you know, I wanted to go from being this bolted on curriculum to being the center part of what we do, and you're relaunching, revisioning Alpha, this is a time to sort of listen in. We know that on Alpha, 80% of guests come by personal invitation. All the promos that we put out there, all the social media we put out there, that's brand awareness. People come because someone has invited them to come. So how do we get our parishioners to begin inviting people from outside the church? So this begins with the pastor and leadership team agreeing that this is what they want to do. So this team has to be united to create this kind of a cultural shift. And you know, paradigm shifts are hard. Some parishioners might leave because they might say, well, this is not what I signed up for. And even Jesus faced this in John chapter 6, toward the end of the chapter. He asks the 12 apostles, well, are you going to leave me too? You know, others were starting to go astray and say, well, this is getting too hard for me. He asks his most trusted ones, are you going to leave me too? So paradigm shifts are hard, but they're not impossible. And a cultural shift can begin within a church when the pastor and the leadership team start teaching the church how to be invitational. And this takes some time. And so I'm going to share a few ideas about how to help create this kind of a cultural shift. So I really think that storytelling is the best way that a church can catch this vision. So Holy Trinity Brompton, or HTB, was the founding church of Alpha, and it was my church for 2 years. And so I can say from having witnessed it firsthand that the senior pastor really does set the tone for growing Alpha in your church. It's the work of the entire congregation, but the pastor has a pivotal role. So almost every week, Nikki Gumbel, who was the senior pastor, would interview someone who had recently finished the Alpha course for the first time. And he would always ask them 3 questions, always the same 3 questions. Would you have called yourself a Christian before coming on Alpha? What was your experience like on Alpha? And what difference has Jesus made in your life? Every week, Same three questions. And that last question, what difference has Jesus made in your life, was the pivotal question, because that's encounter with Jesus. That's the experience of the Holy Spirit, and you can never take away somebody's experience. And so, you couldn't be a parishioner at HTB and not know that Alpha was your thing. It was not some group over here that was doing it. It was our thing. Regardless of whether or not you could get there and participate in Alpha. I had little kids. I actually never got to participate in Alpha when I was living in London, but I knew it was our thing. I knew it was our thing as a church. So HTB is laser focused on its mission to win the lost, and the senior pastor is vital in the communication of that mission. And the other really good news is that through Alpha, HTB has been revitalized, and a new culture of prayer, hospitality, invitation, listening, and welcome has permeated the church. So the second thought is to, oops, there is my three questions. Sorry, I didn't show it. If anybody wants to write those down, there they are. Would you have called yourself a Christian before coming on Alpha? What was your experience like on Alpha? And what difference has Jesus made in your life? So the second thing I'd like us to just kind of pay attention to is the language that we use to communicate what Alpha is, from the pulpit, in written material, in your testimonies. So often it is just referred to as Christianity 101. And I don't know about you, but to me, that sounds really boring. It sounds like it's a Christian, it sounds like it's a college level class. It's pretty exclusive. It's not welcoming to outsiders. If you're an atheist, are you really going to want to go participate in a 10-week course called Christianity 101? I don't think so. So one of the best ways of describing Alpha that I like is to say that it is just a safe space to explore the difficult questions of life, faith, and meaning. Questions like, why am I here? Is there a God? Why is there so much evil in the world? What's the big deal about Jesus's death? How can I pray? And these are all questions that can be explored in a safe space where everyone is on their own journey, yet they're exploring together. And this idea of discovering your own truth in the company of friends is a very postmodern, very invitational, very appealing approach for people today. And just parenthetically, I just want to add, don't get too bogged down with the idea of people searching for their own truth. We know that if Holy Spirit gets a hold of them, their search for their own truth will become the search for the truth, the way, the truth, and the life. So on an Alpha team, with everybody praying for each guest by name, each and every week, we can just be comfortable. If they want to call it searching for their truth, we're cool with that. They can do that because it's postmodern and it's the groove that they're used to. So the next thing is make sure you don't think about this as a 3-week campaign leading up to your Alpha. And so many churches do this. They will say, right, our Alpha is starting the 3rd week in September. So we are going to, right after Labor Day, we are going to start giving testimonies and promotionals. And we're going to do this 3-week lead up to Alpha. If you want to change the culture of your church, you never stop sharing testimonies. You do it again and again and again. This is who we are. This is what we do. We're about transforming lives for Jesus Christ. And remember, you're not trying to increase the number of guests on your Alpha. That's not the goal here. This isn't a campaign, it's a culture. We're trying to create a cultural shift within our church to a lifestyle of faith sharing. And so you can't leave it to just the 3 weeks before Alpha begins. And in a few minutes, I'm going to give you an example and tell you why. So the next thing is you really want to educate the people in your church to invite people from outside of your church. And so we have on My Alpha, we have all kinds of trailers and promotional videos. You've probably seen some of them to educate your congregation. And I encourage you to use them. But just make sure that you use the correct messaging when you show them. I've heard so many different times, something like they'll show a promotional video and then the pastor will say, if you see yourself in this video, then Alpha is for you. Why don't you try Alpha? And yeah, that could be. It is for people who see themselves in it. But even more than that, it's what friends does that video remind you of? What friends of yours do you see in that video? Why don't you invite them to come to Alpha with you? And remember, the invitation is never, oh, you should do Alpha. I think Alpha would be great for you. The invitation is always, I do this thing called Alpha. It's a safe space to explore the difficult questions of life, faith, and meaning. And I love going, and I'm going to go, and I'd love for you to come with me. It's always this come with me. It's an invitation to come with me. It's not a you should, it's let's do this thing together. And, so if you only refer to Alpha as an introductory course for people who are already in the church who are new, and it's great for that. I think like you should definitely say, first step for everybody new to our church, come through Alpha, because you at least cover the basics and you help them get connected into your church. So that's a great way to start. But if you only do that, then you'll never get people there who are from outside of the church. So if you want to create this paradigm shift, you have to ask people who are inside your church to pray about who it will invite from outside the church. Alpha begins to transform churches when those who are in the church begin inviting people from outside the church. And so I already mentioned the power of storytelling and talking about sharing testimonies of transformed lives. But you know what? Also share in live testimonies the stories, not just of changed lives, but also of invitations themselves. And don't just share the successful invitations, but also share those invitations that were extended where there wasn't an immediate yes, but there was no rupture in the relationship. The friendship stayed intact, because that's what people are most afraid of. If I put myself out there and invite somebody to go to this Alpha thing at my church, and then they're going to think I'm weird, and I'm going to think I'm a Jesus freak or something, and then that's the end of my friendship. That's what they're afraid of. So examples of invitations that were made, but the answer was no, and the person still was their friend, those are important to share as well. Just sharing how someone makes their invitation, makes their ask, can be really empowering. It can help people to extend their own invitations to their friends. So get those stories out there, any kind of stories, just get them out there. That's how we can make it part of the culture of a church. And then another thing, a few things that the pastor can do is to lead by example, by inviting guests to come to Alpha and to come to Alpha as well. People always ask how Alpha has been so successful at HTB. And the biggest part of it is the culture of prayer that they have there, for sure. But Nikki is also in his 98th consecutive Alpha small group right now. And he sets the example that Alpha is for the whole church, himself included. Another thing, these are just a few kind of out there examples, but I've heard of a pastor who presented Alpha by sharing the first video of Alpha at a staff meeting. And that allowed them to understand what Alpha was and to see the benefits that it might have in their own particular ministry at the church. And in this church, a dozen staff members became hosts and helpers on the next Alpha, and they quadrupled their Alpha attendance. Another example that's even a little bit more radical than that was an attempt to relaunch Alpha at a particular church. And the pastor decided to run the first episode of Alpha on a Sunday morning instead of the sermon, and that followed by a lunch and a time for discussion. And then there was some conversation, some teaching that were all about the power of invitation and prayer and how to do that. So those were just, a few different ideas of sharing, anything from something that's, you might naturally think of to, wow, that was a little bit out there. But to become a laser focused invitational evangelistic church, the church really has to operate in this framework all the time, even if you're only running Alpha twice a year. So share these tips that I've shared with you today with your group, with your leadership team. Share testimonies of transformed lives in your newsletters from the pulpit and any other digital or print, communications that you have. And just know that until you're known as, the Alpha Church in your neck of the woods, you're really going to have to rely on word of mouth invitations to get your guests there. Like I said, 80% of people come by personal invitation. So until you have that reputation like HTB does, it's a very grassrootsy kind of a thing where people are, your church members are inviting people from their neighborhood, from their church, from other community groups that they're a part of. And everything that you do in the church just really kind of has to drive back to who will you invite? Who will you invite? So as we think, then that was a deep dive into the pastor and leadership team and what they can be thinking about. But then how do we help our parishioners really catch this vision of living invitationally? So if we want to live an authentic missional lifestyle, there are 5 habits that really parishioners really need to have embraced before we can expect that they even might begin to invite people to Alpha to come and see. So the first really begins with, a type of self-examination. Like as the psalmist said, search me and know my heart, oh God. What are the wicked ways within me? We really need to ask ourselves, are my desires in line with God's? Do I really care about what God cares about? Do I care one whit about the Great Commission? That can be the stopping point for a lot of people. They can't go any farther until they can cross this barrier of I care about the Great Commission because it's what my Lord cares about. If they can't get on board with that, they're not going to get on board with anything of that follows this conversation. So that's really the starting point. The next thing really is, to be a true friend. In Proverbs, we read that a friend loves at all times. So am I really loving my friends if I won't share Christ with them? Or am I in the 27 to 47% that actually thinks it's wrong to share my faith? So that might have to be dealt with some of our church members. Do I love my friends enough to be bold with them? And here's an even harder question. Am I Jesus's friend if I won't do what he told me to do? So this is the next stumbling block that, again, just like with self-examination, if we can't get past this one, we can't go any farther in the conversation. The third one is to cultivate an undivided heart. And I think if we get past these first 2, this is something really that we can really just kind of sit with because it makes the invitational lifestyle so much easier. What do you mean by this? And again, it's the psalmist's great words of creating, give me an undivided heart, oh God. Do I use one set of language with my church friends and an entirely different set of language with my non-church friends? Because, using the same set of language can be really the easiest way to share our faith without being very intentional. If we clean up our words on a Sunday morning, we start talking about faith and prayer and, oh, God bless this and God bless that on a Sunday, and that's the only day we use that language, then it's going to be really difficult for us when we want to go and start talking about our faith with our friends. If we just cultivate this undivided heart and the same kind of things that we want to be known for in our language on a Sunday morning, we're known for on a Monday through Saturday, then people will know, our friends will know that we love Jesus, that we talk to him every day, that we have a vibrant faith. And so then they will know that we are just being authentically ourselves when we then dip our toe into asking them about their relationship with God, what their experience with church has been. So I feel like having this undivided heart, this language that is not shifting from one day of the week to the next, it's really like tilling the soil of someone's heart before you begin to plant the seeds. So if we have this going on in the background all the time, that when we plant the seeds, our friends' hearts have already been, the soil of it has already been a little bit tilled, if that makes any sense. And then at that point, then we're ready to start planting some seeds. And this, the parable of the sower, that's all throughout the Gospels. You know what happens. You say something that's remotely spiritual, and what kind of response do you get? Some people, you're going to get the eye roll. Some people, you're going to get this stony glaze. With some people, you'll get an acknowledgement, and then that's it. Some you'll get a permission to continue. Some you might even get a question, like a follow-up, like, what did you mean by that? And you'll be able to discover a little bit more with them. Remember that everyone you meet is on their own spiritual journey. So they might be closed to the gospel, or curious, or open, or seeking, or already following. So gospel sharers are people who pay attention to where people are on their own spiritual journey. And we pay attention to where God is at work in people's lives around them. So it's not being judgmental, it's being aware, being alert, so we know how to have conversation with them and when is the appropriate time to plant seeds and be salt and light. So then once we planted some seeds, we are also called to be salt and light, to begin asking some more intentional questions about where they are in their faith, to go deeper, but without preaching. So again, I'm just going to pull something from Craig Springer's book, How to Revive Evangelism. And he shared, and this came from the Barna study that we did with them. These are the 3 least helpful qualities that spiritually curious non-Christians would identify in Christians who try to share their faith with them. So these are the 3 triggers of, I don't like that. I don't like, here they are. Christians who have all the answers. Christians who are quick to point out the inconsistencies in other people's perspectives. And Christians who are good at debating topics. I think that's really good news for those of us who don't want to share our faith very much. Because they don't want us, non-believers don't want us to know all the answers. They don't want us to try to win an argument. They want to have a conversation. So we want our invitation to someone to be just that. We want it to be invitational. We want our faith discussions to be conversational, where we prioritize questions over proclamations. So these kind of faith conversations, instead of it be us saying everything we know about Jesus, everything we know about the Bible, no, that's not what anybody is interested in. These faith conversations should model for our friends the safe space that Alpha will be for them to ask their questions. So once you've gone through these things, this self-examination, do I care about the things that God cares about? Am I a true friend? Am I cultivating an undivided heart? Am I planting seeds? Am I having conversations that are salt and light? At that point, you're now ready to pray about who to invite to Alpha. You're not even ready to invite to Alpha yet. It's just to pray about who to invite to Alpha. So I want to just tease out a little bit more before we jump to the whole invitation. I want to go a little bit deeper with what seed planting and salt and light might look like. And I think this is just a great way to think about it. It's a gear shift. So if any of you have ever driven a manual transmission or have been a passenger in the seat where somebody else is driving a manual transmission, you will recognize this image on the screen. So these are the gear shifts of driving a manual transmission car. All these things happen seamlessly if you drive an automatic like me and don't ever have to know about any of the gear shifting. But our conversations follow a similar sort of pattern as gear shifting. When you think about number 1 being a casual conversation, and then we're going to these deeper levels of conversation into a spiritual conversation mode. So stick with me on this. So we start every person we meet, first time we meet them, we're in a very safe, casual conversation. Hi, what's your name? Where are you from? Where do you live? Where do you work? What's your family like? Very safe conversations. With many, many people, we never, ever get beyond casual conversation. They just always want to keep it surface, like way up here. Don't ever get down to a level 2, which would be a meaningful conversation. Something that maybe after you've known somebody for a little bit, and you can start to ask them, well, what brings you joy in life? What is stressing you right now? What has it been like to be a parent for you? What is it like to what has unemployment been like for you? Things that are just, that really ask somebody to be a little bit more vulnerable, but we're not in a spiritual conversation. We're just getting ourselves there. We're just setting the table to show that we are a safe person with whom to have a conversation. And then number 3 would be a spiritual conversation. This is where, I heard you say something about about church and it's not a good, you don't really like the church. Did you have a bad experience? Could you tell me a little bit about that? Or what do you believe? I've told you about my Christian faith a little bit. What do you believe? So taking it a little bit deeper into what does what sort of spiritual things could we be talking about? And then 4 would be a salvation conversation, leading somebody to a faith in Jesus. And where then 5 is helping them grow in maturity as a Christian. And of course, there's always a reverse there, because you could back out of any place where you are and then just move on to another place. But if you know anything about driving a manual transmission car, you know that you cannot go from gear 1 to gear 4 because you'll stall out the car. It doesn't work that way. Likewise, if you've just met somebody and you're like, hey, my name's Bonnie, would you like to meet my Jesus? Like, it doesn't work that way either. Like, normally you will stall out that conversation so fast. So it goes the same way. We have to take our time with these different gears that we shift through in our conversations, recognizing that if you've dipped into one conversation, if you dip into the spiritual and you get that don't come any farther, glance from them, you can always go into neutral and just back it up to first gear, keep it casual, and then go into meaningful and wait for another opportunity to go to spiritual. The one thing to notice, though, is that the key time to be thinking about talking to somebody about alpha is when you sense that it's time to shift from 2 to 3. And if you shift from 2 to 3 and someone is tracking with you in the spiritual conversation, that's a time to talk to them about alpha, to say, hey, we do this thing called alpha at my church, and it's a great place, a safe space to explore questions of life, faith, and meaning. One of the things just like driving a car, a manual transmission car, you have to listen for the engine. And in these conversations, you have to listen for when is the right moment. You have to be paying attention. This friend of mine, where are we in our conversations? I can never get her out of casual. I just can't get her out of casual. Well, please don't go to spiritual until you've gotten to meaningful. And then wait for the opportunity when you're in meaningful to move it on to spiritual. Again, listening to the Holy Spirit, having conversations with the Holy Spirit. What are you doing in my friend's life, Lord? I love this definition of evangelism. It's joining the conversation that God is already having around you. God is at work in our friends' lives. He's having conversations with them that we know nothing about. So we're just asking Holy Spirit to come and reveal to us where he's already at work so that we can join him where he is. And we do that through prayer. So I just want to share with you the story of the first alpha that I ever participated in, which was the alpha that I did in my neighborhood. And so this was the year after moving back from London, where we had been for 2 years. And God put it on my heart to do alpha. But like I said, I never did alpha when we were in London. I had 3 little kids and I couldn't get myself in there on a midweek night. And so thankfully, alpha is pretty easy to run. So I was going to do it in my home, but I didn't know who to invite, and I sensed that it was a neighborhood alpha. So I started by praying. But first, I already had those 5 steps in place, the steps that I mentioned before about the self-examination and being a true friend and cultivating an undivided heart and being aware of seed planting and being salt and light. And I was having those kinds of conversations with my neighbors anyway. So I started doing my daily dog walk. It helped that I had a puppy at the time. And so every day I would go up and down my street. There are about 40 houses on my street. And I would pray for each and every household. I would pray for everybody by name to the extent that I knew most of them by name. Some of them I knew stories. Some of them I knew some of their beef with the church. And so I prayed into that. And so I just prayed for everybody for probably about 5 or 6 weeks. And then I made my invitations. What's really interesting was I had a list in my mind of the people that I was going to invite. And then I did this 5 or 6 weeks of prayer, and God changed up that list. And it was not the same list that I had in mind. But I made my invitations and they were different with each person, depending on what I knew about their story. And I was clear about what I was inviting them to. In this case, I was inviting them to a coffee at my house to come and see, because none of them had heard anything about Alpha. Most of them were Catholic and I'm Protestant. And so I needed for them to feel safe in knowing that Alpha was fully accepted by the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church, the, mainline church, the evangelical church, the Pentecostal church, fully accepted. So I needed for them to come and see. So at the 100% of them said yes. They all came to the coffee and they all said yes to doing Alpha. And so there were 7 of us who journeyed together for that Alpha. We stayed together for 2 more years doing other Bible studies after that. And I can tell you, if I hadn't stopped for those 6 weeks to pray, I wouldn't have asked the same people. And I probably wouldn't have had 100% yes. I was partnering with God in the work that he was already doing, but that I was unaware of. The only way that I could sort of tap into that was through prayer and just listening for his spirit to help me discern who to invite. So I couldn't have done it in a 3-week run up to Alpha, and your parishioners can't either. This was years of preparation of me getting on the same page with God about my calling as a co-missioner with Christ. It was a lifestyle of faith sharing, of being intentional about cultivating an undivided heart and looking for opportunities to share my faith, even if it was just to say, oh, this is what I learned at church today, blah, 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 blah. And then 5 to 6 weeks of targeted prayer, and then the invitation to come and see. And then our Alpha began. So let's look at the 4 steps that I have here to an actual invitation, but I really want to precede that with just, something that I touched on briefly, but I think we just really need to tease out a little bit more. Probably the number 1 reason that people are afraid to invite somebody to Alpha is the fear of rejection. So we just need to hit this bully over the head before we go any farther. So here's the thing about the fear of rejection. It isn't a natural part of human behavior. Babies and toddlers don't have a fear of rejection. We develop this fear over time. It's a learned behavior as a result of our interactions with others and the world around us. So if we learned this behavior, you know what's coming next, we can also unlearn this behavior. So let's break down what we're really so afraid of. We're afraid of that absolute rejection where someone's no is also met with hostility and a rupture in the relationship. We don't want to lose our friendship. And that's what we're really, really afraid of. They're going to think ill of us. But rejection actually falls along a spectrum of response, everything from eager acceptance to hesitantly agreeing to politely declining to outright rejection. So studies show that outright rejection only happens about 5 to 10% of the time. So the rest of the responses, 90 to 95% of the time, they're all wins. All wins. It might take a little longer to get there, but they're all wins. So I want to just go through and give you an example of each one of these that I've had in my own life. So the eager acceptance. So that was the Alpha group that I did in my neighborhood. I took the time to pray. I had cultivated that lifestyle of planting seeds all throughout. By the time I got to making my invitations, everybody agreed. They're like, yeah, no, this would be great. I would love to. A hesitantly agreeing one is one of my dear friends whose husband was an atheist, and she invited him to come to Alpha, and she told him, oh no, there's just this dinner at my church, just come. And so, he hesitantly agreed to come. And once he got there, then he learned that, oh, that was just the introduction. Then if you like it enough, you can stay for the 10 weeks. And so he hesitantly agreed to come the next week, and every week he hesitantly agreed to come the next week, and he hesitantly agreed to come to the Alpha Day Away. And at the Day Away, he gave his life to Jesus. And so, beautiful, beautiful story. Politely declining. I have a friend who I had known in our conversations that we usually kept it casual. And then sometimes we could go meaningful, but it was really only about our kids. And then but I knew that she had a beef with the church, but she wouldn't go there with me. One time she did go there with me and told me about just her problem with the church. And so I said to her, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry that you had that encounter with the church. My church does this thing called Alpha, and it's just a safe space to explore faith at your own pace. And I do it all the time, and I'd love to do it together anytime you'd like to. And she said, thank you, but no, I'm not really interested. 5 years later, she texted me and said, do you ever do that Alpha course anymore? And I said, yeah, I do that Alpha course anytime anybody wants to. Would you like to do it? She said, yeah, I would. So we did Alpha together. Outright rejection. I don't have a story for you. I actually don't have a story for you of an outright rejection to Alpha or something else like it, where the friendship was ruptured and they were not friends anymore. So I think we need to redefine failure so we can move beyond this fear and really step into courage. Just because somebody doesn't say yes, it doesn't mean it's a failure. We need to remember that their no is a part of their story. It's not our story. It's a part of their story. And it might just mean that they're not ready yet. But God is still writing their story. God is still having conversations with them, even if it's, God, I don't think I like you. That's still a conversation. They're still open. So just keep showing up. Keep showing them the love of God. Keep planting those seeds. Keep being salt and light. And by all means, keep praying for them. So what does an invitation look like? Well, this is Alpha. So it begins, runs, and ends on prayer. Remember, Holy Spirit is already at work in people's lives. So you are just asking him to reveal where he's already moving. You're asking him, who should I invite? And you might not get an answer that first day, and that's okay. You just keep praying. You just keep praying. He's not in a hurry. We don't need to be in a hurry. So remember how I prayed for every house on my street before extending those invitations? Just keep asking Holy Spirit, who should I invite? And then start praying for people by name. This is crucial. Prayer precedes invitation. So if your church members aren't inviting people, chances are pretty high that they're not praying for people either. So remember, I targeted my neighborhood. That's who I was praying for. It was pretty easy. You might just keep a running list of who it is that you're praying for. You could also, your church could get these 1102 prayer cards based off of Luke 11:2. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And it's a 21-day prayer campaign. And you list 3 people that you are going to be praying for to come to Alpha. And you pray for them at 11:02 a.m. and 11:02 p.m. every day for the 21-day campaign leading up to Alpha. Again, that can't be your entire thing. Like you have to be operating in this framework more than just those 3 weeks, but that's like a concerted time of prayer. And God will show you who to ask and when it's time to ask. I think it's also important to tailor your invitations to each particular person. What do you know about them personally? It might be someone that you want to invite from your church, where you just say, I'm going to do Alpha. Would you do Alpha with me? Like I've done Alpha before, and the opportunity to have a fresh encounter with Jesus is just so beautiful, and to really remember why we love Jesus. It's just such a great thing. Would you come and do it with me? So that's a type of invitation to someone who's already in your church. But someone who's not in your church would not respond to that kind of invitation. You might need to say to them something like, I know we've had so many conversations like during the pandemic of how hard life is and why does life have to be so hard? And if you'd like some extended time to kind of talk about those things, we have this thing called Alpha, and I love doing it, and I'd love to do it with you. It's a safe space. No question is off limits. No answer is considered wrong. So yeah, just tailor the invitation to your particular person. Then also know whether you're extending a general invitation to an Alpha sometime or for a specific Alpha with a specific start date. So with my friend that I shared who 5 years later said, yes, I'd like to do Alpha, that was just a general invitation. I didn't really think she was ready to do an Alpha then. It was just, I was floating the idea out there. I do Alpha. This is a great thing that we could do together sometime. With the women on my street, it was a specific invitation. It was an invitation to come to a coffee to do an Alpha that was going to begin in a couple of weeks. So just make sure you're clear in what you're inviting them to, and then check back in, because you need to give people some time to think about it. You might need to give them some more information. You might need to reiterate that Alpha is a safe space to explore these things, these spiritual matters at their own pace. And just if someone says no, just don't get discouraged. Remember the no's that I've shared with you tonight. Most no's have nothing to do with us. Most of the no's mean not yet. So just keep praying for them. So, and I end with where we began, prayer. If you forget everything else that I've said, just remember to pray. Be praying for the people that God puts on your heart to be praying for, to come to Alpha. It's the most important thing that we can do. Only prayer can revitalize your church and your people. So begin to pray together. Get some people to come together to pray for revival in your church. That's exactly what started things rolling at HTB. Before they even rejuvenated their Alpha, they were praying. They were praying for revival in their church. You might consider creating a weekly prayer gatherings or a 24/7 prayer room focused on repentance, praise, and petitioning for Holy Spirit to come in power. Just imagine what it might look like if prayer became the heart and soul of all of our churches, so that we too could play our part in the evangelization of the nations, the revitalization of our church, and the transformation of society. So that's the end of the PowerPoint and this part of the training. I'm going to open it up for questions and comments and discussion. I just did want to make a quick comment. You're going to see more about it in this month's newsletter and some other communications that come out. But Alpha has partnered with the organization called Glue to put on the He Gets Us campaign. So some of you may have seen these mostly black and white ads that come out like during some of the they began at March Madness. So some of the different sports events. We're going to have a couple of we're having two commercials actually at the Super Bowl. And so we're doing that sort of advanced campaign that would have happened around like a Billy Graham campaign of trying to get churches engaged with being what I'm lovingly referring to as the first responders. So the folks who will respond to these explorers, as they're calling them, who want to know, just have somebody pray for them or just have a question. So we're trying to gather some folks to do that. And I'm also trying to tie that in with existing Alpha teams. So if you have an Alpha team, because one of there's a couple of different calls to action from the He Gets Us campaign. One is that they would just have somebody reach out to them. And the other is that they could go and do an Alpha course. And so this might be a way that you will have people coming to your Alpha who aren't yet even at all connected to your church. So just reach out to me if you're interested in knowing some more about that. I'm going to be posting later this week about a training on that to have some more information. But it's just a great way to utilize your Alpha team to be these sort of first responders, reaching out to some seekers, and then also trying to draw them into your Alpha and ultimately into your church. So I'm going to open up the floor now for questions, conversation.
Hi, Bonnie.
Hi, Phil.
I have a question. Well, if you don't mind, first an observation. That's an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, you're just like, who's the luckiest priest in Pennsylvania and why am? Seriously, aren't you guys jealous that I get to have like Bonnie in the congregation here at Good Sam? You feel amazing. Well, my question, I have a number of them, but one would be, talking about the Glue campaign and He Gets Us, and people, explorers will eventually want to find out, right, as a consequence of that, if they take action responding to that campaign, they'll want to find out where there's an alpha course near them.
Yeah.
So my question is, as you know, we're beginning the campaign, the prayer campaign specifically, and the communications campaign for an alpha at Good Sam that's starting in September.
Mm-hmm.
If people, let's say, you know, at the Super Bowl, watching the Super Bowl, respond, how do we get Good Sam's Alpha course, which is scheduled to take place and will, God willing, take place in September, into the Alpha system? So when they go to the Alpha site or whatever, they search, where's an Alpha course near 19301 or something like that. When can we get in the system so that our course will show up in that search?
Great question. So we can register, and you and I, we can do that. You can register a course anytime. It doesn't have to be like starting in the next 3 months. So if you know that, let's say you're doing a winter alpha right now, and then your next alpha is not going to be until the fall, you could put it up even today that says we're going to start on September 18th. And so any of those explorers that come between like February and September could see that and join in on that. I do have a number of churches that are thinking, wouldn't normally be thinking of doing a post-Easter alpha, are now thinking of doing one specifically because He Gets Us is happening. Like the biggest viewership of these ads is going to be at the Super Bowl. So there's, you know, some churches are saying we actually need to do an alpha post-Easter, like starting the week after Easter.
Okay.
But you can register for whatever start date you want, like today. It doesn't have to be today, for like starting within the next 3 months. So
Thank you.
mm-hmm. Other thoughts or questions?
Yes, when you say that you just started doing alpha, I've been in this kind of circle of frustration, I'll call it, at my church. There are a couple of us who are praying for alpha. At this point, Jim is not ready to commit to actually helping with an alpha, but he is happy to continue praying for alpha. And part of my heart just keeps going, I need to just invite some friends to do alpha via Zoom because they live different places, and just do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say to my pastor who's involved with outreach and relationships and stuff, you know, I'll say, could I just have your blessing to just do the alpha? And he'll say, well, how is your team building going? And I'm thinking, you're
Yeah.
this is and I think when you say, you know, you just have to pray until you have clarity and then just do it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, obviously appropriately sized, do it. But yes, because how do I have stories to tell unless,
Mm-hmm.
because my church has wonderful outreaches and they're truly great, but it makes it a challenge to introduce alpha, because it's like, oh, but we're already, you know, we have people who are coming to Christ, and I'm going, yes, and that's beautiful, but they probably have questions that they just need to talk about.
Yeah. So
And
you don't have the support of your senior leadership.
oh, no, they love the idea in principle,
Mm-hmm.
but they just, it's very difficult.
Does it seem too daunting for them?
No, I literally think it's because the outreaches that are going on are so good that they don't see where the need is for alpha. And it's outreaches kind of in the traditional sense of the word outreaches, you know, going and ministering and preaching in neighborhoods and doing give away food giveaways and
Mhm.
and loving on people. I
Mhm.
mean, you know, it's in many ways very similar, except
Yeah.
the Alpha just provides such a safe vehicle for, well, you know,
Yeah.
alcoholics.
Well, Mary Jane, you could run your own Alpha if you were going to be doing it virtually anyway. There's nothing that prevents you from just running your own Alpha. I mean, that's exactly what I did, because the people were from a variety of different churches. One of our like great Alpha supporters here at Alpha Mid-Atlantic is he ran a workplace Alpha, and he, he just did it. It wasn't connected to a church. It was workplace
did it.
Alpha, and he did it with his work colleagues. And so you have, full freedom and authority to just
Do it.
run it. And I walk alongside you just like you were a church. It's because and it is as simple as just, doing it by yourself. And if you're doing Alpha virtually, then there's no food that you need to think about. So that whole piece is very easy.
Okay, yes, thank you. I know it's kind of obvious now, but when you said that this time it clicked.
Yeah, good,
Yeah,
good.
just pray, clarity, go.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
Bonnie, excellent presentation. I think it's probably why there's not many questions, because you did such a good job presenting.
Thank you.
We are looking at doing our Alpha, the week after Easter.
Okay.
We want to do it for a while. So right now, what's some tips you would say to action right now? We've got a couple of people that we're wanting to spearhead it with, but over the next 3 years, some close to 3 months, we've got what are some steps that we should be intentional about in kind of getting that ready? Obviously, with all the communication we've already given, is there any additional things you'd be suggesting?
Yeah, so you guys have a team, right?
Yeah, a couple of people. Yeah, we're starting to build on that. Yep.
Okay. So just make sure, I'm not sure if I was clear on the question. Is it like, how do you build out your team first?
Yeah, preparation work. What's some of the best steps that we should be doing? Like how far in advance should we be communicating this event to the church? Like announcement wise, and team meetings and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I would announce yesterday, because like
Okay.
the more like lead time, the better.
Yep.
I would use as much communication as you possibly can. Let the parishioners in on the vision, if you're wanting, Pastor Philip and I were just talking about this today as sort of a relaunch at our church. If you want to have as many people in your church go through it as you can, so they get trained to understand, oh, this could be the best tool in my toolkit for faith sharing in my own life. So if that's part of your vision, then you're really going to want to be messaging it over and over again, because people are, they're talking to their neighbor the first time you say it. The second time they're coughing, they miss it. The third time, maybe they've heard it. And then the fourth time, like, oh, wait, that sounds familiar. I should pay attention to that. So you have to just keep messaging some of the same stuff again and again. And so let them in on the secret, let them in on, we are focused on our joy and privilege and honor of getting to be co-missioners with Christ. And we're going to be all about that this year and going forward. And so we want you all to get equipped in what Alpha is. Even if you've done it before, come back and do it again. And so get them educated about it. And part of the education also being, how do you invite your friends, and try to invite some friends to come. So think about the messaging, the communication, frequent and early, and often. And then I would say, make sure that you have your team built out. So make sure that as part of the whole team, you're thinking of the 3 kind of subcomponents of the key bit, the prayer team. So some folks who are just going to be committed to coming and just praying the whole time. The hospitality team, which would be setting the space there, setting that up, preparing or purchasing or arranging or doing whatever with the food, and then the cleanup with that. And then some of the hospitality folks are the ones who are welcoming and, making everybody feel at ease as they come in. And then you have your small group team, the hosts and helpers. And I'd lump the MC in that group too, of whoever's going to be the front person to make everybody feel warm and at ease and as less awkward as they possibly can feel. So I would say get that team built out. Personal invitation is always the best way to begin with that. You're extremely fortunate if you can just do a blanket all call from the pulpit and people are like, oh, that's what I've been waiting for. You probably have to tap people on the shoulder and say, I think you'd be good for this. Yeah.
That's good. I appreciate it. Yeah, we're almost considering just doing it as a church privately, just keep it church wide so it gets into the culture, and then do an outreach to it as well. I don't know what your quick thoughts on that are, or just, hey, go for it and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I would say go for it and see what happens, and do the both and, like, try to get everybody and try to get people to invite their friend. You guys have run it before, right?
We have not. No,
You've
this
done
is
it.
the
Okay.
first time, sadly. Yes,
Okay.
this will be our
Okay.
first time. Yeah.
Okay. The only risk of it being an all church-wide alpha is that everybody would get comfortable and slip into Bible study mode in the small group. And that is an alpha killer. And so you just want to avoid that. So if you were to do it that way, I think I would recommend that you assign a few roles, as contrived as that may seem, that if you have a small group of 10 with like a host and 2 helpers, maybe, and then you might say 2 people, let's assume, are from your church. And then of the remaining 5, like in the roles that they have, and then of the remaining 5 that, maybe 1 would be an atheist, 1 or 2 would be a skeptic, 1 would have had a bad history with the church, and maybe 2 are just, kind of lapsed Christians. And you kind of give people roles to try to help practice, not just ending up being everybody preaching at each other, because that's what you don't want to have happen. So, I mean, there's no right or wrong. And this, like, I'm saying this to you too, Mary Jane, like, there's no right or wrong. So you can do your alpha however you want to do your alpha and have the freedom to do that. But I'm just trying to warn you of, like, one of the best practices of alpha is to run a small group where the conversation, it flows like around a dinner table conversation, and nobody's preaching at anybody else, and you're asking questions and able to share your opinions. And if everybody's sharing all the facts that they know about the Bible, then an outsider is not going to feel comfortable there.
Yeah, it's good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm glad to see, I think was his name Scott from York, the other man there that just left.
Yeah.
Anyway, because, well, it's kind of funny because I can just look down and see the church that he's at out my window, because I live really close, but I go to Ellicott City for church, which is actually, so I'm happy because being up here, I don't know how to connect people. So I'm happy if this church down the street, I could take people to during the week, because I only go to the Ellicott City one on the weekend. But just by the way, the elder that led we had like 30 different alphas that this couple led. And I went to the Brompton Church in 1994, heard Nikki Gumbel give the advertisement for Alpha. And I was going to school in London, and I was on my way to Indonesia. And I was so excited about Alpha. I got brochures, mailed it to my elder in Ellicott City. Little did I know, he took it and ran with it. He was the first person to start Alpha in the US, Dave Fritz. And I was away for 2.5 years. I come back and they're like, oh yeah, you sent us that brochure. We ran with it for like all this time. So it was, we are not doing it currently. I'm not sure all the reasons why, but Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out, but
Oh my gosh, that's great. Wait, what was his name? Dan
Dave
Fritz?
Fritz.
Dave Fritz.
He and his wife, Dave and Allison Fritz.
Oh my
Yes.
gosh. What's
Yeah.
the name of the church again?
Well, back then it was Living Water. Then we
Okay.
merged and we became a different church. So
Okay. Okay. Wow. That's
Yeah.
great.
yeah, they were they were a full force.
Wow. I know. Yeah, it was amazing back in those days, like when people found out about Alpha, like generally from just coming, being in the UK and then coming back, they were just like so excited to share it. So yeah.
I've got to go, but I'm really happy to have joined, and I hope I can get them to listen to this. Since it's a recording, you'll send us a link, right?
I will.
Thank you so much, Bonnie, and everybody. God
You're
bless
welcome.
you. Thank you.
God bless you. Well, did anyone else have any other questions?
It was very good. Thank you much.
Oh, you're welcome, Mary Jane. All right, well, just let me know how I can help you. I'm always here to help you guys. You should be able to see this recording up on our YouTube channel, Alpha Mid-Atlantic, in the next day or two.
Great.
All right,
Thank you
many
much.
blessings. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Have a blessed night.
Thanks, Bonnie.